Hello again, everyone. For those who are coming back, new people, hi everybody. Never quite really sure what the audience, some of this stuff is, and why I am compelled to do this. Honestly, it's not completely explicable, but here we are. We're going to do this because it's kind of, as I've explained a little bit in some of my writing, it's kind of like you have a child that you have to give birth to. It's got to get out there, and then there's some element of peace after that. It's sort of, and I wasn't going to go into this necessarily, but there's a lot of talk about channeling and stuff like that going on TikTok right now, and other areas as well. It's kind of making a comeback. It's part of this whole idea of the ascension, which is in many respects facilitated by tech, like hardcore networking infrastructure, and I don't think people really appreciate that. And you have kind of you have information sharing, which includes visual, audio, writing. You have information sharing, virtually, at least a good portion of the senses right now, which in many respects is akin to AI and artificial, is akin to sort of virtual reality, right? That basically can hit any spot on the globe in real time. So, from a sort of a spiritual perspective, right, the phenomenon, and I wrote an article about this maybe a week or two ago. It's September 23rd. There's sort of a certain phenomenon around, you get to a certain momentum, and there's an acceleration that occurs. And these are accelerations in terms of energy, in terms of ideas, and these are sort of characteristics of natural phenomenon, okay? Like when you have a cancer that takes over the body, like it just reaches a certain point where, the body can't fight it anymore. It's sort of that exponential growth idea. And once it turns the corner, you're pretty much done for. So this technology infrastructure that we have, okay, and again, my background is engineering, networking, distributed computing, and I build massively scalable, secure infrastructures. This is what I do for a living, okay? As much as I'd like to think of myself as a mystic or an author, my trade, that which I support myself and my family, is engineering and building these high-performance systems. And they sit at the very core of the, let's call it the ideological revolution that's taking place, okay? And that's what we're witnessing. That's what people are calling the ascension. That's what people are calling this 3D to 5D transfer. Once you move to a different layer of effectively ideology, which has a mapping quite directly to metaphysics, which is something that I've written a lot about and which we'll get to, you have the ability to shift to quote unquote a different dimension, a different timeline. That's what all these multiverse people like to talk about, okay? But ultimately what you're doing is you're basically shifting your vibration to another way of thinking. And the relationship between the physical world and the mental world is far beyond what I think we really truly appreciate, okay? So that's sort of like a quantum shift. And by quantum, I mean it's not from a discrete, continuous line from a gradual. It's actually a quantum leap of sorts, which is how quantum mechanics got its name, because they realized that these pulsating things that were spinning around these nuclei were effectively jumping between different sort of orbits. They were like, what the hell is going on? So particle physics now has figured out and said, well, they're appearing out of nothing, and then these other materials are coming, and then they're appearing over here, and then there's antimatter. It's like, dude, that's not what's going on at all. These are waves. This is energy that sort of coalesces at a certain point to bring shape and form to things. You have to understand what's going on. You have to see it. You have to visualize it. You have to meditate on it. You have to understand what's really happening at that elemental level. And then from that, you can extrapolate different things. What's the relationship between that and mind? Mind, in a way, is a subtle form of energy. It sort of moves that undercurrent, what I call the cosmic quantum energy field, okay? It sort of moves that undercurrent. Mind does. It has the ability to shape and to manipulate it. And you could see that quite directly from a standard physics standpoint if you draw the design of a table on a piece of paper, and then you get some plywood and you get some saws and you start banging and build, and then you build a table. You can see very directly there you have a concept, and then you have a transformation into physical reality. Full stop. Nobody questions that. But when you start moving into more subtle realms where you're talking about mind and expectation and what is its relationship with the universe, what is exactly shaping what, and things start to, okay, well, maybe there's something else going on here. So anyway, I wasn't even going to talk about this today, but this is how this happens. This is how this works. You have this technology groundswell, and where before you'd have a couple of insane people like Nietzsche running around in God knows where in the mountains somewhere, losing his mind when he sees a dead horse, and then going mad, right? I mean, you have him, and you've got Ramakrishna in Bengal, right? And then and Vivekananda, who comes to the States, and they're all totally on another planet, okay? Like all these guys, okay? Say what you will about what that planet is and where they came, and forget about it. Now what you have is an undercurrent and a groundswell of people who understand these things either implicitly and explicitly, who are yearning for something more, all collaborating and connecting with each other primarily on TikTok. It's owned by the Chinese. Go figure. So people don't think they're crazy. Or just crazy enough to do something like this. Put myself out there. When I have everything to lose and virtually nothing to gain. Let me say that again. I have virtually everything to lose and nothing to gain. I'm not making anything off this other than the fact that I feel compelled to get this message out because I think it's being lost somewhere, like people haven't put all the pieces together. So that's this part of this ascension. Now what happens is when you have that collective set of people that are now changing their mindset, okay, it's like a virus, just like COVID. It sort of spreads, okay? And now you get sort of what I'll call, from a systems perspective, you get the establishment of an operational infrastructure to support this new way of thinking and this new way of living, essentially, okay? We're talking about TikTok, we're talking about Patreon, we're talking about YouTube, we're talking about OnlyFans, and these platforms that connect the creators themselves, okay, directly with the consumer on the other side. And all of the middlemen have been removed. I'm working with somebody now on the West Coast. PayPal, Venmo, like all these technologies that facilitate the support of basically a new economy. I mean, that's what's happening. And it's global. And it has the networking infrastructure, it has the payment infrastructure, it has the content creation infrastructure, it has the computing infrastructure. Everything is in place. All of those layers that took us 60 years to build. Like the AT&Ts, the Bell Atlantics, the Verizons, T-Mobiles, Deutsche Telekom, China Telecom, Singapore Telecom. All of these companies that no one knows anything about now, they're just like, it's plumbing, whatever. Plumbing. These people invested billions and billions of dollars. They put fiber cable underneath the ocean between continents. Do you understand what that means? And how to do that? And how expensive that is to do? Or to maintain? Like, people have no concept. They make a phone call and they're like, it's fuzzy. It's fuzzy. I'm pissed. I'm going to go to a different provider. It's fuzzy. The connection's going across the world in 2 milliseconds. So this ascension, this energy build, okay, and this shift of consciousness has a shift of way of life. You have to think of it from a practical standpoint. There's an operational infrastructure, there's a technology infrastructure, there's a payment infrastructure, and people are moving into this new way of working and doing and being and living. Okay. Does that mean that governments are going to topple tomorrow? No, probably not. Probably going to be okay. Guess everybody just needs to relax a little bit. But there is this massive wave of economic and wealth transfer going on. That's all good. It's all good. The other thing that should be completely evident that people are, you have physics on the one hand and you have mysticism and esotericism. Esoteric means hidden. Okay? Hidden messages in ancient texts, which I've looked at virtually all of them, again, from this Eurasian perspective in antiquity. And yet the physics today, as it relates to the fact that you can basically run information on and at the speed of light, and that quantum mechanics basically tells us that, everything's sort of, manifestation of physical form is a question of probability, and you have the observer himself has the ability to collapse that wave function, basically, to basically manipulate the result. So that's experimentation apparatus. That's where that model comes from. There's a statistical wave function that it shows the distribution of possible outcomes when you try and measure an electron, right? Its spin, its velocity, its mass, or anything like that, right? So the observer, well, in that experiment, it's a piece of apparatus, but theoretically, right? And most people have made this jump, but you've left the experimental world here to a certain extent. I can't measure a thought having an effect on a spin. Because I can't quantify and measure the thought. It's not a measurable, quantifiable phenomenon. But you can get to it, and they do these experiments, head, tails, flips, and you think heads, and heads comes up more of the time. So indirectly now you can see the connection. So I've got light, information sharing at the speed of light, and time dilation as you start to move and travel at the speed of light, which means time starts to slow down. What the fuck is that? What does that even mean? Time starts to slow down. And then you basically have a universe that's made of energy, that's influenced by mind. You got to start putting the pieces together. This is what I'm telling you. Okay? This isn't religion. This isn't God. I've looked. Just take it, all of you atheists out there and agnostics, you're my friends. Take the Bible, do whatever you want with it. Doesn't matter. Look at the world you live in and start reverse engineering what the hell is going on. Which is, we basically have a world, an energetic world that we manipulate and are deeply connected with, right? Because manipulation presupposes a level of integration that we can't really fathom. This is one of the mysteries of quantum mechanics, right? Is this entanglement phenomenon. What the fuck does that mean? That means if these two particles were at any point in time related or connect to each other, you split them, it doesn't matter how long or how far apart they are. You measure one, you can predict the alternative measurement of the other. It doesn't matter how far they are from each other. What the fuck? What? The whole thing's connected. The Big Bang tells us that everything was a single point, the point of a needle, some 14 billion years ago, 13.8, I think, or something. And entanglement tells us it's all basically the same fabric. It's all connected. And we are somehow hardwired into it. So, I mean, I'm kind of skipping to the end, honestly, because what I was going to do today was talk a little bit about theology reconsidered and the second part of it, which is the quantum metaphysics part. That was my original intent today, but I sort of got a little off track. I apologize for that. But we can kind of fall into it because when you look at the geometric patterns and some of the mathematics that we know is true because we've constructed this technology, digital era, and information age on top of it, okay, a lot of that geometry, whether it's the golden pi ratio or a Fibonacci sequence or some of the geometric images that you have sitting behind my head right now, okay, and in other parts of my house, there's an underlying geometry to this fabric, this cosmic quantum energy field, okay, which is, you know, it's kind of like the Higgs field, but they're just fucking confused. They keep, well, it's antimatter and it's matter, and then it just sort of pops into existence. You know, like there's something much more subtle there, and they haven't recognized the fact that measurement phenomenon, okay, will only get you so far. It's an indirect measurement. It's an indirect data point, right? It's a level of indirection. You have pointers in computer science. It's like its mass is, okay, its mass tells me an attribute, a property of what? Of this electron. But that doesn't mean that the electron has mass. You know, this is the part that, and I was listening to a particle physics, one of these guys from CERN the other day, and he was talking about particle physics, and he was like, well, you measurement this, and a particle has mass. No. We have created an attribute called mass that tells us something about some object, which inherently, by the way, as part of that analysis, we've assumed is an object. An object is a classic Newtonian, you know, has mass, has velocity, it moves, and you touch it, and it moves somewhere. It's set. And yet quantum mechanics, which is the underlying model of the particle physics, tells you that you're not dealing with objects at all. You're dealing with the field that exhibits these quantum probabilistic type observer-based phenomenon. So what do you mean a particle has mass? I'm going to measure this thing in time and space, and it's going to come back with a value. That's not okay. This is how we end up back into epistemology, and why that becomes important from a philosophical perspective, right? When you try and understand something, you have to define the boundaries upon which you can get you can gather some intelligence about something. What is knowledge? To understand something, what do you need? This is why we have to go back to Aristotle, who talks about, you know, purpose effectively being one of the core components and the core attributes of being able to truly understand anything, of epistemology, just science, understanding. What's the purpose of the electron? Is it not devoid of purpose if you're just trying to measure it? So where are we within a philosophical and epistemological perspective there? We're way out into left field. And there, by the way, there may be, you know, certain scientific knowledge that comes out of these guys smashing particles at the speed of light together, okay, with billions of dollars. There might be things that they learn, but like, when they explain it to you, you know, don't ask them for, you know, philosophical or, you know, questions about metaphysics, or they're not in that world. And honestly, to their credit, most of them are like, hey man, I don't know what's going on. I'm just measuring some stuff. To their credit, a couple of them will step in, but there's something else going on, and we're somehow tied to it and integrated to it in a way that's in a way that's really mysterious, honestly. So let's see how many minutes here. That's 20 minutes. The last one I did was 40 minutes, and I you know, so I guess that's a lot of time for people. But I'll come back and try and do the end of theology reconsidered later, the quantum metaphysics part. But I'll sort of close out at least that the first half of Theology Reconsidered. So we talked a little bit about Snow Cone Diaries. We talked about, Charlie's journey to try and understand himself and what the meaning of life was, and whether or not there was a God. And it comes into sort of an analytic. It sort of turns into more of an analytic and an academic exercise where he tries to triangulate the truth, looking at the ancient systems of philosophy and the ancient texts that come out of northern Africa and the Mediterranean, Greece, Rome, Asia Minor, India, and the Far East primarily. And some patterns emerge from that, and therefore, he ends up in a place where you start to have to build a theoretical framework for not only the development of these ideas in antiquity in Eurasia, because there are patterns there, but you also have to ask the question of, given this sort of sound kind of perennial philosophical infrastructure, that all these building blocks that are pretty much everywhere, the sacred geometry and the numeric phenomenon that are the numerological phenomena that are pretty much everywhere, you have to start as an engineer, you have to start looking at, well, why did these guys all come up with the same damn answer? Now, there's either a common source, which, okay, it's possible, particularly when you have humanity that emerges out of, Eastern Africa at about 65,000 years ago, give or take. Okay, so that's a new piece of information. Now, how far back can the oral tradition go, right? In my estimation, it's about 4,000, 5,000 years, give or take, at a max. So that gets us to 7,000 BCE, let's say, maybe 8,000 back. Because most of the texts, the Vedas, the Avestas, the I Ching, those from the second millennium BCE, more or less. You can pull it back if the oral tradition, if you really super extend it, given the way that they transmitted that stuff in a very sort of scientific way, sound, meter, you could take it back to maybe 6,000, 7,000 BCE, give or take. So maybe there's a common source there. There's an Indo-European. You look at the philological evidence, the linguistic evidence that indicates that, most of those European languages, Sanskrit included, all sort of stem from a common parent, right? Well, how far back does that go? And can I think that scholars differ there. But to me, it seems pretty clear that the Indo-Europeans, the Indo-Aryans, the fathered race of the Persians, the ancient Indians, the Avesta, and the Vedas specifically, it seems like there's a common ancestral theological and philosophical root there. Now, at the same time, I think you also, that's not a full explanation. Some of those things could have yielded a sort of a common system that develops and evolves, or at least this type of commonality, this breadth of commonality. But you have to sort of add another phenomenon there. There's something else going on. Jung picks up a lot on that with respect to the collective unconscious, okay, and the unconscious. But that's a 20th century development, really. So you have to wait for that. But he starts talking about archetypes and mythos and how that stuff emerges out of kind of a collective consciousness phenomenon of humanity. Joseph Campbell has done a lot of work in this area as well. And you can sort of, okay, so there's a common root 65, 70,000 years ago, and yet there's this sort of collective unconscious as a phenomenon that, is measurable at some level from a psychological standpoint, that you can identify it because you can see these artifacts that come from it. It's what we experience in dream, for example. So we all have a connection to it in a very tactile, real way. You want to put dreams on the side somewhere and say, it's not real. It's not real. It's not real. We're all connected to it. We're all powered by it in some way, these archetypes, these images. Freud's all about that too. He just looks at it from a very sexual, energetic standpoint. But he understands how important these sort of primal, instinctual, kind of archetypical themes are. That's part that comes out of the unconscious, and that manifests itself in our physical world and surroundings. Anybody that's been in therapy or listened to people who are in therapy understands that. Your inside and outside world are directly correlated, right? But how correlated are they? This is where mysticism, psychology, and physics meet. And that's the piece that I just don't think people are piecing it together. You know, I think of people go from a mystical standpoint and from a shamanic standpoint and from a religious standpoint. Yes, but just take take the religion out of it. Let's just look at it as an engineering problem. What's going on? You got to pull from all these different areas and you start to get a picture of what's going on. And then once you have an intellectual picture, and this is why there's different paths of yoga, and why Gnana, the path of knowledge, is a legitimate path towards God realization in the Vedic and the Vedantic philosophy that Vivekananda puts forth. He says there's 4 pillars: bhakti, love; karma, work; Gnana, knowledge; and then Raha Yoga, which is Patanjali and manipulating the energy centers directly, the chakras and all that stuff. So, and the 4 of them really combine to drive the spiritual aspirant to enlightenment, okay? But Ghana, when you put all these pieces together, it's important that you have an intellectual understanding that this isn't hocus pocus, it's not God sitting on a chair somewhere up in heaven. No. There's something very different going on, and it's very real, and we're all tapped into it. So, I think part of the reason why I'm here, part of the reason why I'm doing this, if anybody's listening, is to help people understand that, ground it and root it in their practical life. Because even if it's a grand illusion of holographic light, which in fact I think it probably is, that doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to maintain it, so that others can come down and appreciate and enjoy it. This world of bliss and merriment. I mean, come on. It doesn't mean we can piss it all away. Here we are fucking destroying forests and throwing plastic in the fucking oceans. I mean, I'm probably the worst among them. I got 6 computers in here. Probably running more power than half the block. And I want to get a generator. But don't piss it. This is part of what people need to understand, is the level of integration that we're talking about. When this butterfly effect phenomenon, which you do here, has effect in South America somewhere, and the weather's like, yes. Entanglement. It tells it. It's we've measured. It's a fact. You're not going to get away from that. And you're plugged into it. And you're integrated with it in a way that you can't even, half the time I can't even comprehend. Therefore, what we do matters. And how we behave matters. And how we treat the people around us. And how we treat the environment. And how we treat animals. Like, all this shit actually really matters. And this is what the ancients knew that we've forgotten. More or less, among other things. And this whole environmental movement, a lot of that stuff is coming up now, and people are they're starting to figure it out, and that's where a lot of this ascension phenomenon is coming from. But it's there's an economic wave that's followed by an ideological wave, or underpinned by an ideological wave, and that's where we're all headed right now. Anyway, that's gonna do for today. I got through none of the material that I was gonna get through. Pretty much. And I will try and hit it up again when I can. It is Thursday morning, September 23rd. Peace, my brothers and sisters. Peace.